nuclear war. Just the idea is enough to make your blood run cold. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it's estimated that more than 200,000 people perished. The world has come close to oblivion a few times. There was the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, and in 1983, a Soviet commander correctly identified a false alarm that should have dictated a full nuclear response. Thankfully, nuclear arms treaties and controls have made these events far less common. On the 5th of February, that system effectively ended. The last remaining treaty between Russia and the United States was allowed to expire. For the first time since 1971, we are now in a situation where there are no limits on the amount of nuclear weapons a country can make. There is no agreement to communicate test launches or to inspect nuclear facilities. There is no agreement to not attack early detection warning systems, which in and of itself can cause chaos and lead a country to thinking they may be under attack. The only thing left is trust, and that is eroding even between allied states. The only legally binding mechanism left is the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and in practice, it only restricts non-nuclear states. It places no enforceable limits on the production or expansion of existing nuclear powers. The UN Secretary General put it well when he said that the end of New START marks a grave moment for international peace and security. The former head of the British Armed Forces stated that the architecture and frameworks that have helped keep the world safe now risk unraveling. But like any tragedy, this breakdown in global security wasn't caused by one factor. It's been a series of serious setbacks in international cooperation. First, we'll look at how decades of progress and security have completely unraveled. Then we'll examine the world as it stands now and see why even allies are feeling spooked and isolated. Finally, we're going to look at whether we really are living through the dawn of a terrifying and destructive new era, or a turning point that we can still pull back from. Since 2019, 3 separate treaties restraining nuclear conflict have fallen like dominoes. It would be all too easy to say COVID made inspecting nuclear sites too hard and Ukraine made the political landscape for restarting them too toxic. Unfortunately, these treaties failed because of a subtle but dangerous shift in mentality, both in Moscow and in Washington, D.C. For Moscow, this has been a case of slow and steady. It didn't take long after Vladimir Putin consolidated power for his broader ambitions to become clear. In a widely cited speech in 2007, he openly rejected the post-Cold War security order. Only months later, Russia suspended their obligations under the Conventional Armed Forces Treaty. The next year, they attacked Georgia. This would prove to be the first of many cracks that Russia would impose on the armor of nuclear treaties designed to protect us. What would follow from Moscow was a series of alleged treaty breaches ranging from developing banned missile systems, severely limiting access on reconnaissance flights, and later halting all nuclear facility inspections entirely. Putin also used the fact that some of these agreements were aging to his advantage by ensuring Russia continued to invest in novel weapon concepts that fell outside the scope. This included hypersonic missiles, which have been used strategically and to devastating effect in Ukraine. The angle for Russia, it seemed, was to keep the agreements in place and comply with them selectively. Over time, the rules remained on paper, but their protective value steadily eroded. This didn't go unnoticed in DC. And if the strategy for Russia was slow and steady, for the US under Trump, it was anything but. Instead of attempting to repair weakening agreements, Washington chose to walk away from them. The theory was that if the existing treaties were outdated, poorly enforced, or being violated, it made sense to scrap them and start again. An agreement that could capture the new types of weapons being made in Russia, an agreement that would be harder to circumvent, and perhaps most crucially, an agreement that would include China too. In the Cold War, and for most of the 21st century, nuclear arms control was dominated by the 2 great nuclear powers. This was true even 10 years ago. Today, it just isn't. In the last decade, China's nuclear arsenal has doubled from 300 warheads to 600, and today China's military is the largest in the world. Many experts agree that including China in any new agreement for nuclear arms control isn't just prudent, it's essential. At surface level, this idea seems to make perfect sense. In a world where Russia is ignoring key elements of treaties and China is rapidly expanding its nuclear and military capabilities, treaties can feel more like self-limitation than global cooperation. And if you think of it like that, leaving one treaty and creating another seems logical, and yet there's one pretty big problem. China has zero interest in being part of any agreement. China has been incredibly consistent on this. Chinese officials have repeatedly stated that their arsenal remains significantly smaller than those of the two traditional superpowers. From their point of view, joining a binding reduction treaty while the other two states possess thousands more warheads makes little strategic sense. Conversely, for the other two, ignoring China at the rate of their current production is equally untenable. The decision to leave or let old agreements lapse was a bold one, hell, even a brilliant one if new agreements are forthcoming. Without one, however, the gap between treaties becomes a vacuum, and vacuums in nuclear policy are dangerous. If only that were the only problem. The US nuclear umbrella could be about to be strongly tested, and not by Russia or China, but from within the alliance it was built to protect. Before going further, it's worth being clear about what a nuclear umbrella actually is. It's the promise that the United States will respond with nuclear force if one of its allies is attacked. That promise has shaped global security for decades. It is the reason so many countries never pursued nuclear weapons of their own. It kept proliferation low by making deterrence collective rather than national. The umbrella protects all NATO members as well as non-NATO allies like Japan, South Korea, and Australia. For decades, it has been the backbone of allied security, giving nations the confidence to rely on deterrence rather than building their own arsenals. But now, cracks are appearing. Trust in the US shield is wavering, and the very system that helped keep Europe and other allies safe for generations may no longer be enough to guarantee security in a rapidly shifting world. Recent rhetoric, most notably under Trump, has cast doubt on America's commitment to its allies. Suggestions that the United States might not defend Europe unless allies paid more into collective defense exposed a vulnerability that many of them had never seriously considered. At first, the response was pragmatic. Several European states increased military spending and reaffirmed commitments to NATO. For a moment, the alliance appeared to steady itself. Then came the trade war. This time, the European response has been less than enthusiastic. Across the continent, talk about decoupling from US over-reliance has grown significantly. This debate has not just been restricted to economic levers either. Amongst the nations in Europe, the UK and France both possess nuclear weapons. Quiet, but consequential debates are now underway about what a distinctly European nuclear umbrella might be able to look like. Now, these discussions remain politically sensitive and largely conceptual. Their very existence, though, signals a massive shift in strategic thinking for the transatlantic alliance. On paper, such a move could appear mutually beneficial, at least initially. The United States could reduce long-term defense commitments and reallocate resources theoretically, and Europe would gain greater control over its own security and become less vulnerable to sudden political swings in DC. In reality, though, the consequences could be far more destabilizing. Decoupling from the US nuclear umbrella would represent the most severe shock to NATO since its formation, and would fundamentally change what NATO is, not just how it operates. Europe's dilemma reflects the broader global shift. Arms control frameworks are collapsing, and trust between rival powers is eroding. And, unfortunately, it's the same story among allies. While it may feel like the storm clouds are beginning to close in amongst us, it's important to remember that the Cold War felt nothing like this. It was significantly worse, and we are not in that place again. Not yet, anyway. At the height of the Cold War, nuclear war could have and almost did break out at several moments. The number of nuclear weapons was also approximately 80% higher than it is today. Communication between rival powers was incredibly slow and difficult. Detection systems that did exist were painfully slow, prone to error, and did little to aid in defending against a nuclear strike. Today, by contrast, even with all the safeguards that no longer exist, the same cannot be said. Communications are near instant. Meanwhile, detecting a missile launch anywhere in the world, along with what type of missile it is and where it's going, can happen in a matter of seconds. Satellite systems have more than doubled the amount of warning time we have for nuclear weapons, and every extra minute of time is invaluable when it comes to double-checking threats are real and ensuring an appropriate and correct response. What the breakdown in these agreements does do is create the space for an even faster reversal of all the progress that has happened since the end of the Cold War. When the New START treaty expired on February 5th, Donald Trump expressed his desire for a new and improved treaty, but did not confirm that there was any agreements in the meantime to cap nuclear weapons at current levels. In fact, it seems clear the US already intends to do the opposite. When the Big Beautiful Bill passed Congress in 2025, it did so with a $62 million provision to reopen some missile tubes on their Ohio-class submarines that were initially shut specifically to ensure compliance with treaty rules. The logical assumption is that with those being reopened, more nukes are going to be coming to those subs very soon. That does not bode well for a future agreement, and it doesn't help with keeping nuclear weapons at the current levels. The US, Russia, and China in particular have all made similar statements that weapon expansion and development is going to be necessary going forwards in order to ensure ongoing national security. The reason why they argue this is because of the gains the other countries will be making. While that may be a circular argument, it's an unfortunate precursor of the global reality moving forwards. Catastrophe is not inevitable. The danger isn't that war is coming tomorrow. It's that the guardrails are slowly disappearing. All signatories of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty agreed that a nuclear war cannot be won and should never be fought. For as long as that holds true, we're all going to be okay. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, please feel free to give it a like and a subscribe. Thank you for watching, and have a lovely day.